My husband and I were each other's first love. At 17, I became pregnant, and shortly after, we got married. Our life became challenging. While our friends enjoyed carefree lives, we were suddenly burdened with the responsibilities of parenthood. We were not prepared for this. To make matters even more challenging, 1.5 years after the first pregnancy, I became pregnant again. I was not even 20 years old when our second son was born. My husband had to stop his studies and started a business with the help of our parents. I found myself taking care of both children on my own. While my husband is a great father, I was the one who had to stay at home, handle all the household chores, and care for the children while he worked 14 to 16 hours a day. He worked those long hours out of necessity because we couldn't afford to hire help for the shop. Somehow, I started to blame him for our situation. Over the years, I harbored a deep resentment and held him responsible for robbing us of our youth and freedom. Part of me knew it was unfair, but I chose to ignore it. Fast forward to 2 years ago. Our marriage wasn't bad. We understood that we had to work hard to provide our 2 wonderful kids with opportunities in life, and we functioned well as a team. My husband is a loving person, and he, along with our 2 sons, treated me like the queen of the house. I felt loved and happy. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed out on my youth due to getting pregnant at a young age, and I still unfairly blamed my husband for it. I used to go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week, and during that time, I became friends with the capoeira instructor. Before I knew it, we were having an affair. I understood that what I was doing was wrong, but I somehow rationalized it because I didn't have any emotional attachment to the other man. It was purely physical, and in my mind, it was a small compensation for all the experiences I felt I had missed out on in my youth. I had the desire to end the affair every week, but the truth is, I didn't stop until my husband discovered it just 2 days ago. My husband's reaction was completely unexpected. He packed some of my clothes into 2 bags and called my parents to come and pick me up. When I got home, my mother was in tears and my father was visibly angry. My husband made it clear that I was no longer welcome in our house. I didn't need to ask why he was so furious. I immediately knew he had found out about my affair. It seemed best for me to spend the night at my parents' house. I told him I would give him time and space to calm down, and I promised to return the next day to talk with him. Before leaving, my parents were deeply disappointed in me. They love my husband and hold him in high regard for his achievements as a successful businessman and a good father. Although they were shocked, they still cared about me as their daughter. They offered me a place to stay and some space to reflect on things. The following morning, I returned home while my kids were at school and my husband was at work. He usually came home for lunch, so I waited for him. When he arrived, he looked like a broken man, and it was the first time I truly realized the gravity of what I had done and the devastating consequences for the people I love. I tried to convey how deeply sorry I am to him, emphasizing that my love for him never wavered. I explained that my affair wasn't a reflection of his shortcomings, but rather a manifestation of my own personal issues. I expressed my desire to seek individual counseling, IC, and marital counseling, MC. He sat silently, listening to everything I had to say for about an hour. At that point, he calmly informed me that he had no interest in attending MC or IC or making any effort to salvage our marriage. He explained that after all we had both sacrificed and all he had done for me, if I could still betray him in this manner, he wanted nothing to do with me anymore. He asked me to move out of our house and go to my parents' house. I pleaded with him for a second chance, emphasizing the importance of our kids having both parents in their lives. However, he became furious, shouting at me and questioning whether I had considered our children's well-being while engaging in the affair and saying other hurtful things. I told him I would return later when he had calmed down to talk and see my children, and then I left. 4 hours later, when I came back, I learned that my husband had already informed our sons about my affair the previous day. They were deeply upset and showed no affection towards me. They were clearly siding with their father. I told my husband that he shouldn't have involved our children, but he retorted that I shouldn't have engaged in the affair if I couldn't handle the consequences. He argued that our sons, at their age, could make choices about where they wanted to stay, which made me realize the gravity of what I had done and the potential consequences. My husband called my father again, and he came to pick me up. I wanted to stay, but neither my husband nor my children wanted me there. Now I find myself at my parents' home, feeling incredibly alone and empty without the three most important men in my life. I've risked everything I hold dear for something that meant nothing to me. I've caused pain to my husband, my life partner, and my 2 kids, and I still don't fully understand why I did it. It's as if I was on a self-destructive mission that could cost me everything. What should be my next course of action? How can I regain the trust and love of my husband and kids? What can I possibly say to someone I've hurt so deeply? Will my children ever find it in their hearts to forgive me? Please offer me some hope and guidance. Update. I didn't anticipate such a strong reaction, and while I've read all your messages, I can't respond to each one individually. However, I'll address as many questions as I can. The other man is divorced, and to the best of my knowledge, has no other relationship. I understand that some may doubt my claim that it was purely physical. I also struggle to comprehend why I risked so much for so little, but it genuinely was just about the physical aspect. I have no attraction to the other man beyond that. My sons are 15, nearly 16, and 13 years old. They are wonderful boys who have always shared a close bond with their father. At times, I felt a pang of jealousy regarding their relationship. Although they've always loved and treated me well, there has been a unique connection between the 3 of them that I've envied. I miss them all deeply and hope I won't lose them. Regrettably, my affair with the other man lasted for nearly 2 years. I contemplated ending it from the very beginning, but I am ashamed to admit that I'm a weak person who enjoyed the attention and validation from someone like him. He made me feel desirable in a way I hadn't felt for a long time. I recognize that there's something deeply wrong with me, as only a broken person would jeopardize what I have for validation and pleasure. I'm uncertain how my husband discovered my affair. I suspect he had an inkling without concrete evidence for a while because he confided in my father, but I don't have any additional information. Our communication has been limited to me expressing my profound remorse and his hurtful words, including calling me names and asking me to leave the house. Please note that I don't blame him for his anger and name-calling. I understand that's how he perceives me right now. I realize that rebuilding my relationship with my husband will be an arduous task, but I'm holding on to hope. We've already weathered some tough moments in our lives, emerging stronger each time. I don't take him for granted, and I'm genuinely afraid that he may no longer want me. Yet I cling to hope because he means the world to me, along with my sons. Taking your advice into account, I've scheduled an individual counseling, IC session for tomorrow to gain a better understanding of myself. I also acknowledge that I may come across as controlling, possibly stemming from a lifetime of needing to manage everything. I've always been the caregiver, tending to the sick and stepping in when my husband had to travel for business. I've been accustomed to taking control and handling family matters, which might explain my tendency to plan ahead and engage in damage control when emotions run high. I've discussed the situation with my parents, and they believe I should give my husband and children some space to process what I've done. So I've decided to do just that. I plan to reach out to my husband on Saturday, offering a time to talk and present him with my timeline and a letter. I have another question for all of you. If my husband inquires about the specifics, wondering if there are actions I've taken that would make my affair even worse, should I keep those details to myself or share them? I fear that certain details might become the final straw, preventing any chance of reconciliation. Update. I'm receiving conflicting advice here, and I'm unsure about how to proceed. Some of you advise against telling my husband that my affair was primarily about sex, while others suggest complete honesty. The truth, though, is that my affair did revolve around sex. My experience had been limited to my husband until I started the affair. While my husband is loving and considerate, and I enjoy being intimate with him, he can't compare to the other man when it comes to sexual satisfaction. I never experienced an orgasm through penetration until I met the other man. He had greater stamina and was much more adventurous and daring than my husband had ever been. I'm not sure how sharing all of this with my husband would make him happier or help him cope with my affair. Society teaches us that complete honesty isn't always the best policy. For instance, people don't tell a mother that her child is ugly, even if it's the truth. There are situations where a lie can spare someone's feelings. I had my first individual counseling session today, and my counselor also advises against divulging everything to my husband. He suggests being honest about the actions and places I've been with the other man and when, but not sharing details that might further emasculate him and damage his self-esteem, like sexual comparisons between him and the other man. I tend to think that following my common sense and the counselor's advice is the way to proceed. I visited a friend who is also a lawyer, and she advised me to return home immediately, as not doing so could be viewed as abandonment of my children and household duties, potentially harming me in a divorce process. I intend to go back home on Saturday, but I want to give my husband and children some time to process everything that's happening. I remain deeply confused and genuinely sorry for the mess I've created. I understand why people might doubt me when I say I never loved the other man, but it's the truth. The only man I've ever loved is my husband. The other man was more like a sexual awakening for me, making me realize I had been sexually dissatisfied for a long time. I don't believe it's my husband's fault. I didn't even know what I truly wanted until the other man showed me. My husband called me while I was writing this, saying we needed to talk. I would have preferred if he had taken more time to cool down, but I'll follow his pace and do everything in my power to help him. Alright, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I'm seeking insights from other men who may have experienced something similar. My wife and I are both in our late 40s. We initially met in college and dated for 3 years before tying the knot in 1996. We have a 25-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter. Yes, you read that correctly. There's a 16-year age difference between our 2 children. I'll delve into this topic more in a later part of this post. Shortly after our wedding, I accepted a job in another city across the state, and we relocated. A year later, my wife gave birth to our son, and right after that, we bought the house we currently reside in. It's located in a fantastic neighborhood, and we have formed many close friendships here. I couldn't think of a better place to raise a family. My wife holds a degree in education but never seriously pursued a career. Instead, she opted to be a stay-at-home mom, occasionally working a few days each month as a substitute teacher. Now that our daughter is in school, my wife has been able to increase her work days slightly. In general, we have a harmonious relationship, and our marriage had been strong and happy until recently. A little over a month ago, I was going through some old electronic devices we had stored in the closet of our spare bedroom. My plan was to wipe them clean and take them to the recycling center rather than disposing of them in the trash. The box contained old laptops, a desktop computer, several tablets we had accumulated over the years, as well as a collection of chargers, old calculators, and even an outdated tube TV. I connected all the devices to charge them so I could ensure all files were deleted and none of our personal information remained on them. It was a time-consuming task, but it had been on my to-do list for a while. Everything went smoothly until I reached the tablet my wife had used before I bought her the new iPad she uses now. When I powered it up, I initially didn't notice any content that needed to be removed, as she primarily used the device for browsing, shopping, and social media. I was just about to perform a reset when I stumbled upon an app that I didn't know she had been using. I decided to open the app, and to my surprise, I discovered hundreds of messages between my wife and another user that dated back nearly a decade. After reading through the messages, it became evident that my wife had been communicating with a former neighbor who lived 2 houses down from us, and they had been engaged in an affair. Their messages indicated that the affair had started in early May and ended just before Labor Day of that year. They used the app to arrange meetings at either his house or ours. It's quite shocking. During that time, this man worked as a window and door salesman, and I had purchased new windows and a door from him for our 3-season room. Based on their final messages, it seemed that the affair came to an end when my wife discovered she was pregnant with our daughter. I could sense her regret in her messages as she informed him about the pregnancy and expressed her desire to end things and recommit to our marriage. In one of their final messages, he inquired about the possibility of being the child's father. Her response indicated that she didn't think so, as she had been intimate with me 4 times that week compared to just once with him. The fact that my wife became pregnant with our daughter came as a complete surprise to us. Following the birth of our son, my wife received a diagnosis of a condition called anovulation, which leads to infertility. From then on, we continued without using contraception for years despite her doctor's advice that there was a slim chance she could conceive. Originally, we had plans for a larger family, but after the diagnosis, we adopted a more it happens-y approach. When we learned about her pregnancy, I was overjoyed at the prospect of having another child. However, going through those messages between them felt like a gut punch. It was hard to believe, and I was utterly disgusted by the whole situation. Never in a million years would I have imagined that my wife could do something like this. After discovering the messages, I initially thought about confronting her, but then a voice inside me urged me to pause and carefully consider the situation. I decided to give it more thought and conduct further investigation before making any decisions that I might regret later. After all, this occurred nearly a decade ago, and our marriage has been fantastic, especially since our daughter's birth. But then I had a chilling thought: what if my daughter isn't biologically mine? How would I react? I know I would still love her, but it left me wondering how I would handle the situation. Even if it turned out that she wasn't mine, I'd love her just the same, although my heart would be broken far beyond what my wife had already done. For the rest of the day, I went on as normal, as if I hadn't seen the messages. I took all the old electronics, except for my wife's old tablet, of course, to the recycle center. My daughter came with me, and I took her out to lunch afterwards. This all happened exactly 4 weeks ago today, and since that time, I've shut everything out of my mind and have been going on as normal. As I said, my marriage has been wonderful, and I love my kids with my entire being. If I confront my wife about the affair, it will open up a Pandora's box, which could end our marriage and potentially reveal that my daughter isn't mine. I definitely don't want to cause any pain for my daughter, and I don't think I want to end my marriage. At least that's how I felt at the time. I was progressing down the path of doing nothing, and things were going pretty well until Friday when I suddenly had a change of heart. At that moment, I was overwhelmed by a strong sense of anger and betrayal. I had hoped these feelings would fade, but over the weekend they have only grown stronger. Now I'm contemplating confronting my wife to make her explain herself and then facing her lover to hold him accountable for what they've done to me. It's clear to me now that they are both morally reprehensible and deserve consequences. While I would never resort to physical harm, I do wish for them to face significant repercussions for their actions. The man and his family moved away a year after the affair, and I doubt my wife has had any contact with him since, but one can never be sure. I suddenly feel compelled to inform his wife and potentially disrupt his marriage, making him endure the same suffering I've endured over the past month. I also have a strong urge to secretly have a DNA test done on my daughter without my wife's knowledge. Even though my feelings for her won't change, I need to know the truth. If it turns out she's indeed mine, I may choose to let go of this and move forward with life. This is where my mindset stands today, which is why I've decided to share this post seeking feedback. I can't discuss this with anyone I know, as I want to keep it confidential. Given the information I've provided, what would you do if you were in my situation? After pondering things for another week, I made the decision to confront my wife with the evidence. I sat her down, retrieved her old tablet, and began reading the messages. She started crying and pleaded with me to stop, but I continued reading until she rushed out of the room and into our bedroom. She stayed there for about 45 minutes before coming back to talk to me. When she returned, my first question was a simple why. Why did she do it? Her response was that she didn't know and that it was a foolish mistake. She then claimed that she felt we were having marital issues back then, and I was becoming distant. So, feeling vulnerable, she got involved with someone who showed interest in her. I challenged her on this, as we never had any marital problems, and I was never distant. I told her she needed to provide a better explanation, but she couldn't come up with one. She described it as one terrible mistake in the midst of 27 great years, urging me to forget about it since I had nothing to worry about. I told her that while she might forget, I never will. I asked her about the duration of the affair, and she said it lasted about 6 months. She insisted that they were only physically together 6 or 7 times, as if that should make a difference. I responded with incredulity, saying, only 6 or 7 times. You only had sex with another man 6 or 7 times. Wow. She began pleading with me, dropping to the floor and crying by my feet. I allowed her to cry there for a while before instructing her to stand up and sit on the couch. Then, I told her to relocate all her belongings to the spare bedroom. Afterward, I explained my intention to conduct a DNA test on our daughter and possibly our son. Upon hearing this, she burst into tears, insisting it was unnecessary because both kids were mine. I questioned how she could be so certain, to which she replied that she only had an affair with one man, and our daughter's conception date aligned with a time when she had only been intimate with me. I countered her claim with evidence from her messages. I read aloud the message in which she stated that during that week she was with me 4 times and him only once. She broke into tears again, and I left her alone, getting up and walking away. Later that afternoon, she moved her belongings into the spare room. Meanwhile, I ordered paternity testing kits from 2 different companies. The kits arrived a week later, and I collected the necessary samples. I told my daughter it was simply a routine doctor's test we needed to undergo. To reward her for her cooperation, I took her out for an afternoon of bowling and games at Main Event on that Saturday. Now I'm anxiously awaiting the test results. The suspense is taking a toll on my sleep and mental well-being. I'm eager to receive the results as soon as possible, but I'm also fearful of what they might reveal. Once I have the results, I'll return with another update. Final update, 89 days later. I apologize for the delay in providing an update, but things have been quite chaotic on my end. Let me start with the best news. My daughter is indeed my biological child. Both of the home DNA tests confirmed with over 99% certainty that I am her father. This was my foremost concern throughout this entire ordeal, and I can't express how relieved I am. The results arrived a little over a week after I sent in the samples. However, I haven't disclosed this information to my wife or anyone else yet. My wife hasn't brought up the topic again, and neither have I. I suspect she's still anxious about the possibility that I may not be the father, and I'm fine with that. If she ever inquires, I'll share the truth, but I have no immediate plans to do so. Regarding my marriage, we are legally separated but still residing at the same address. In a way, our property includes a separate garage building with an attached efficiency apartment. I'm currently living there and will continue to do so until I eventually proceed with the divorce. Initially, we had intended to rent out the space, but later decided to keep it as guest quarters for visiting family and friends. We also allowed our son to live there from his junior year in high school until he graduated from college. It served as a valuable opportunity for him to adapt to independent living. The apartment is quite spacious, measuring just over 420 square feet, equipped with a full bathroom, an efficiency kitchen, and a generous living area. After my son moved out, I utilized the space as my personal retreat when it wasn't occupied by guests. It even has its own distinct address, which I had to re-establish with the post office, quite a task in itself. The reason I haven't proceeded with the divorce yet is that I don't want to be separated from my daughter, not even for a day. According to my attorney, despite our state's laws favoring the betrayed spouse, the most favorable custody outcome I could have obtained was just 50%, and that wasn't what I wanted. I desire to see my daughter every single day. In our state, a couple can legally remain separated indefinitely. My attorney did advise caution about living in the same house, but given that the structure is separate from the main residence and has its own address, there shouldn't be any issues. While my wife isn't thrilled about the legal separation, she's relieved we haven't gone through with a divorce and clings to the hope of reconciliation. That's not in the cards, but I allow her to believe there's a possibility to maintain a positive environment for my daughter. Currently, we're on very amicable terms, and I feel empowered because I hold all the cards. Following my attorney's counsel, we've equitably divided all our assets except for the house, which will be addressed when we do eventually divorce. Furthermore, since the separation date, I've required my wife to contribute half of the household expenses. We've set up a new joint account for this purpose, and each month she must deposit $929 into the account, covering half of the bills, taxes, and homeowner's insurance. She's also responsible for her own car insurance now, as well as purchasing all her own groceries and medications. My wife has been making continuous efforts to persuade me to give our marriage another chance. She's aware that the divorce paperwork is prepared and waiting at my attorney's office, ready to be filed at any moment. Despite this, she's been careful not to do anything that might upset me, and surprisingly, I find our current arrangement somewhat agreeable. Before our separation, I insisted that she provide me with a detailed timeline of her affair and also disclose the situation to our families, including our son. It was a challenging process for her, and it has been a humbling experience. Together, we sat down and explained the situation to our daughter, who handled it with maturity. She knows that both of us love her and that everything will be okay, no matter what. As for the other man involved, I confronted him. I managed to find out where his wife worked and called her at her office. When she answered, I introduced myself, and she remembered me from the neighborhood. We exchanged some pleasantries before I mentioned that I needed to discuss something I had recently discovered about my wife and her husband. There was a moment of silence, and she said, "A-okay." I believe she understood the nature of the conversation based on my tone and choice of words. She asked if I could share the information right away, but I suggested it would be better for her to call me after work. She agreed and mentioned she would leave early to ensure we had enough time to talk. About half an hour later, she called me from her car, and I proceeded to provide her with all the details. Later that evening, I sent her copies of their messages and a copy of the confession letter my wife had written to me, which included the timeline of her actions. She was not visibly emotional, but rather filled with anger. They share 3 children aged 19, 17, and 16. She confided in me that her love for him had faded many years ago. She had initially planned to leave him next year after their youngest child graduated from high school, but the evidence of the affair has prompted her to take action sooner. She expressed her gratitude for informing her, and we decided to stay in contact. Interestingly, this man had the audacity to call me on my cell phone a couple of days later. He must have obtained my number from a neighbor or found it online somehow. When I answered the call, assuming it was his wife due to the matching area code, I was taken aback when he revealed his identity. He began with a lengthy apology that I allowed him to deliver uninterrupted. At the conclusion of his apology, he expressed a desire to have resolved the situation amicably without causing harm to our families. His words irritated me, and I retorted, "Go to hell," before promptly hanging up. I subsequently blocked his number, and there has been no further communication. When I spoke to his wife again, she informed me that she had already ejected him from their home and initiated divorce proceedings. She explained that she had recently cared for him during a period of serious health issues, and while she initially felt some guilt about leaving him at this stage of his life, the thought of his infidelity quickly dispelled any remorse. She acknowledged that he might struggle on his own, as he has a tendency to drink, lacks cooking skills, and is generally unable to care for himself. However, she emphasized that at this point, she no longer cares about his well-being. She confided in me, sharing her suspicion that he had been unfaithful with other women throughout the years, although she lacked concrete evidence. She emphasized that now, as he's grown old, ill and overweight, no one desires his unpleasant company, including herself. I admire her strong-willed attitude, but I wouldn't want to find myself on her wrong side. While I might have felt a twinge of sympathy for the man if he hadn't been such a habitual cheater, in this case I don't. That's where this chapter of the story concludes, at least for now. Given the way things have unfolded, I can envision us continuing to live in this arrangement until my daughter completes her schooling or perhaps until she enters her teenage years. I understand that some of you may criticize my decision not to pursue a divorce, but I believe many fathers here will empathize with my perspective. I want to express my gratitude for the considerate messages and wish you all good health.